Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm Trevor Scott here with my co-host Matt Giraldi,
What's going on, guys?
and we will be getting into the third tier of running back for your fantasy football drafts. These guys are going to be going in the second, maybe in the third round, and this is going to be running backs 4, 5, and 6 for both of us here, and we'll be talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, so this again, like the Brees versus Bijan, this is going to be a very popular debate as to which guys, should be first, second, and third in this tier. So definitely follow along throughout the summer and kind of see where these guys ADP, falls and rises to.
For sure. And right now, the ADPs are currently Gibbs, then Saquon, then JT. And RB7 has been Kyron Williams. That's been a difficult one to rank and a difficult one in ADP to kind of follow because he was getting pushed up and then got hurt and got pushed down. And then they drafted Blake Corum, which obviously put some uncertainty around him. So I think these three are turning into the consensus next tier behind the main three running backs here. So getting into Gibbs first, he obviously was very good once he got a more sustainable and a larger role throughout the year. He started off slow in terms of touches, but like very explosive player, even in 7 to 10 touches he was getting, definitely was scoring still. But Montgomery was getting all the goal line carries. Montgomery had a couple monster games early in the year too, so there wasn't exactly a reason to go away from him. And Dave Montgomery is still there, right? But I think similarly, like we talked with Bijan, that Gibbs is going to be much more established in the offense and a much more established player going into his second season. And I expect to see him hit the ground running with the role he had at the end of last year.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not going to have a lot of Gibbs because, given his ADP, I keep playing this scenario in my head where, they start off on defense, the opposing team grinds out a long touchdown drive, then they get the ball on offense and Montgomery's on the field and they grind out a long touchdown drive. And then the next time they have the ball, maybe it's the beginning of the second quarter, maybe they have a 3 and out, and then maybe Montgomery comes back on the field. And this is coming from someone who traded for Jahmyr Gibbs last year and loved him coming out of college, love him as a player. But yeah, just having Monty there, it just really scares me away. And I just think the limited upside in terms of touches is just a tough pill for me to swallow. So I've kind of rearranged my rankings personally. Right now, I've actually got it JT, Saquon, and Gibbs. And the first two I kind of go back and forth on, but I don't know. Maybe I'll end up regretting that. Maybe I'll change my tune as the summer goes on. But Monty's a good player, and Dan Campbell really likes him for a good reason. And so, yes, Gibbs can score from anywhere. We've seen how he came on late in the year, but at his ADP, I don't know. I think I'm going to be going in a different direction.
Yeah, which is fair. I think you're giving the early season role a little bit too much credit because Gibbs ended up scoring multiple touchdowns inside the 5 yard.
Right.
I think he had 3 or 4
Yeah.
touchdowns inside the 5.
And
So
it wasn't
I
as
get
much
the
it wasn't as much the Jamal Williams type role where he would come in just at the goal line. It was more like, yes, Gibbs was given those opportunities, but when Monty was in for a long drive, they kind of just stayed with the guy at running back. So that's
yep.
that's kind of my fear with that.
Well, and I get that too, because how many games started last year where you look at the box score after the first quarter and Montgomery had 8 touches and Gibbs hadn't seen the field yet, or didn't have
Yeah.
any touches. Or even it would be so frustrating. You'd see 8 for 27 and a touchdown, and Gibbs would have 1 carry for 30 yards. And it's like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Good thing they're not putting him on the field more. So I totally understand that, and I get that Monty's there. But I think also with ranking these guys, something that you might not have considered is just because Saquon and Jonathan Taylor don't have other running backs they're contending with, those two are contending with their quarterbacks for rushing production. And I think that's a major issue for both of them as well, in a way that's similar to Montgomery being an issue for Gibbs. So I think, getting into Saquon maybe next. I know you said you had JT ranked at the top here, but let's go into Saquon next. Um, he's obviously in a much better situation than he was with the Giants, right? I mean, the offensive line is going to be the best offensive line he's ever ran behind. And so he should be able to push the pile and average yards per carry in a way he never has, or, at least if he's a similar level of player, right, that he can still break all the tackles that he's going to, but also get some more easy 4 and 5 yard carries. We saw it with Swift last year, right? Swift went there. It was the number one. And how many times did he go blowing through the line without even getting touched until 10 yards downfield? So if that's Saquon getting those opportunities, that's scary to think about, because he can be so explosive in the open field and make people miss, and also just run through people in a way Swift can't. So,
Yeah.
there's major upside here in terms of yardage, I think. But again, he's got to contend with Hurts, who is going to be getting 10 rushes a game, like, at least, and he gets all of the goal line work. So when they're down close, the tush push is coming out, and he gets everything at the goal line. Swift only ended up with 5 total touchdowns last year, and Hurts had 15 rushing touchdowns. So unless they decide to change that part of the offense and they're going to give it to Saquon down there, it's hard for me to see a situation in which Saquon gets into the double-digit touchdown range, which is generally what you're looking for at this point in the draft at running back.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I wouldn't expect the tush push to go anywhere. Now, losing Kelsey to retirement and him kind of being the centerpiece of that play, they're obviously going to have to deal with that, but I don't think it's, necessarily rocket science. I think the next guy could probably figure it out. But with, the new regime coming in on, both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, they could change things up. Last year the offense was very vanilla and straightforward. But yeah, I just can't get over him being with the best offensive line that he's ever had. And he's only 27 years old, so he hasn't really kind of hit that cliff yet. So, but we'll see. But you're right, the Hurts thing, it does scare you a little bit.
Yeah, and I personally think that Hurts is going to be a lot bigger of a hindrance to Saquon than Montgomery is going to be to Gibbs. We actually got to see what that is going to look like as Gibbs got more established last year, and they were able to coexist just fine. I think even if early game you have to deal with Gibbs not getting the first touch out of the gate, not getting the first drive out of the gate, um, I think he just showed that he's so dynamic, and he, with 15 touches, with 12 touches, if that 12 touches is the floor, like it kind of was at the end of the year, and if he gets 20 touches in a game, you're like, you're going to win your week type of thing. I just think that Gibbs over Saquon, to me, is the decision at this point that I'm making.
Cool.
Okay, and then let's get into JT, because he's your number one running back of this group and number 4 overall. So why don't you kick it off on Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, so for me, unfortunately, we didn't get to see him on the field with Anthony Richardson last year, and I think maybe they were on the field for like 2 plays together in total. But kind of what you were saying on the negative side about Richardson taking away obviously some rush TDs, but also just getting a lot of carries. The way I'm kind of talking myself into that is the read option. And so these defenses are going to have to account for, both guys. If, they have to focus one side of the field on Richardson and JT gets a hole, like we've seen his ability to, hit that home run. And, obviously last year he was hurt and it kind of took him a while to get his footing back. But even Zach Moss was still a big factor for quite some time. And now the running back room is like Trey Sermon and Evan Hull, which, shouldn't really scare anybody. So I think he's going to be on the field quite a bit. Now he's got a lot of miles on him from his time the last few years, as well as his time at Wisconsin, but he's still only 25. So I think that this should be a very, very good and efficient Shane Steichen offense. So I'm really looking for him to have a bounce back year. I know you kind of got burned by him in the past, taking him number one overall, right, a couple years
Yep.
ago. Yeah, so maybe there's kind of some sour grapes with that, but I'm really bought into this offense as a whole. But given my top ranking for him, Anthony Richardson is going to be someone that I'm going to be targeting very heavily. So I don't really foresee having a lot of JT on those teams, but I think overall, these guys are very close to me. But that's kind of where my head's at with JT at this point.
Nice. Yeah. And for me, obviously I got burned by him when he was the number one pick, right? And he finished his RB 33 that year. It was rough. And he didn't really even get hurt. He might have missed a game or two, but oh wait, no, he did get hurt. He had a high ankle sprain.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, and he was out for like 3 or 4 weeks, but then came back. And high ankle sprains in season, it's just the
They linger.
athleticism. Yeah, the athleticism is just
Yeah,
sapped. But he was playing, and you have to start him while he's playing. So it was just a rough year. And then obviously he had surgery, and it was still kind of the same injury that was preventing him from getting a contract, right? And so there was the injury on top of the contract that kind of held him out last year. And with how well Zach Moss played, they didn't just immediately hand the keys to him when he came back in week 5, which I
hmm
think frustrated a lot of people. And it was part of the reason why I didn't have any interest in drafting him last year. I personally have the opinion that the guys going in round 8 are the guys going in round 8 because those have, right, you're still trying to mine upside there. And if you hit on somebody that can help you all year, that's a better situation than somebody's that's going to start helping you in week 8, even if that is going to be, a top 10 running back after that. I just struggle with holding a guy that's not going to help you for so long. And thinking,
yeah,
just kind of, if you're mediocre, kind of sitting on that lottery ticket, like that's going to be your ticket to make it. Um, and so I prefer not to do that. I also think it's very difficult to trade players like that or trade for players like that, right? You're trying to trade them as though they're the value that you're expecting them to be when they're back. And nobody wants to trade for them while they're hurt at full value. And then once they're back,
yeah,
if they aren't what you expect and then you try and trade them, then you're also going to get lowballed because they were a later round pick. So like it, those type of players are just tricky for me personally. I do like to trade a lot, as anybody watching will know. Um, and so I guess my past experience having no luck doing that has kind of deterred me away from these players. And I'm just always weary that they're not going to get right that season. You have options that you can take a shot on there, and drafting somebody like this in the 8th round in our setup is a starter. So you're passing on a starter, and you're going to end up starting somebody in round 10 or 11 in week 1 when you didn't have to do that. So anyways,
yeah,
that's a little diatribe on injured players. Now, he's dealt with that for the last 2 years, and it seems anyways so far in the offseason that he's going to come into this year healthy, and that's why he's back pushed up into this range, right? He's one of the most explosive players at running back in the league. He's still young, he still has all of the upside, and from the last time we really saw him go off, right, that he was just the number one player in fantasy, we have also seen the Indianapolis Colts get significantly better on offense, right? They locked in Pittman. They drafted Anthony Richardson, who is going to be much better for the overall offense. They drafted Adonai Mitchell this year. They have Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, who are young players that are a little bit more established at this point. So the overall offense for the Colts is just so much better than it was the last time we did this, with JT coming into a healthy season, that I have a lot of expectations for him. And I think that out of this group, again, I try and look at tiers and who's going to be the end of the tier. So like with Bijan, right, attacking that at the end of the tier. JT, who I expect to go last of this tier, is somebody that I'll be looking to attack in Superflex, where I've gotten him in mock drafts around, pick 24, pick 25, the middle of the 3rd round. So, if you're in the early to mid 3rd round and he's there and you don't have a running back yet, say you went like quarterback receiver and he's there, this is another guy that I would be totally comfortable having a hero RB build with, and in a more comfortable spot to take your first running back, in my opinion.
yep. I agree.
And then so I gave a lot of positive information around JT, but the reason I have him behind Gibbs and Saquon is a similar reason to Saquon. Is the Anthony Richardson isn't going to be dumping down to JT, right? He's going to be taking off and running. He scored so many rushing touchdowns in the 5 games he played. I think he had, or 6 games he played. I think he had 5 rushing touchdowns in 6 games. So it's like he's going to be taking off, and I think that caps JT's passing game role a lot. JT
Yeah.
obviously has had some success in the passing game in the past. And with Minshew, right, the statue, or I don't even remember who else he's even played with at quarterback, but it hasn't been a rushing quarterback like Richardson. And it's not like JT's claim to fame is his ability in the passing game in the way
Right.
Saquon's is, right? So I'm definitely more weary that the offense is going to run through him in any way the passing game is going to run through him in any way. So, if he's just a supplemental piece or he's the 4th option in the passing game, his upside is capped in a way that Saquon's isn't even capped. So I'm a little weary in terms of that, but he's going to get all of the work on the ground. He's going to get the rushing touchdowns close too. I think he's going to be getting the rushing touchdowns close. They're going to try and keep Richardson healthy.
Yeah.
Hurts doesn't have to deal with that, right? Hurts has the tush push down. He hasn't gotten hurt. He's not getting hurt on it, knock on wood, obviously, but like that's an established play for them and they know it works and they know it's safe. With Richardson, I can't imagine that they're going to be putting him in any sort of danger down at the goal line. They're going to just give JT the ball, and he's excellent on the goal line. So the touchdown upside over Saquon, I think, for JT is much greater. I just worry about the passing game role in a way that I don't with Saquon. Saquon is an established pass catcher, and JT not so much. So that's the nuanced difference between these two. Obviously, I still like them both as players, but the reason why I have Saquon at 5 and JT at 6.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And you're right. I think, when Richardson scores his touchdowns within the 10-yard line on his own, it's going to be a lot of like broken plays where he kind of just takes over, because you're right. He's going to bulldoze someone and they don't want him to do that. So,
yeah, and he's already said in this offseason that he's not going to change the way he plays, right? Like,
yeah,
which is a very good thing to hear from a uh from just a football fan perspective and from a fantasy perspective. You don't want him to change the way he plays. You don't want him to be going out there worried about injury. You don't want him to be going out there worried about all these things, right? So the attitude, the mindset, that's what you want to hear. Now, I do hope when he gets onto the field, he learns how to slide and he learns how to step out of bounds, right? It's not that important to get an
yeah,
extra yard or two to take major hits. So the mentality early off season, you want to be hearing that sort of thing, that I'm not changing anything about the way I play. But when it comes down to it, ideally he'll be able to stay on the field and make a little bit smarter decisions, and that's going to help JT overall because the offense is going to be much better with him on it. Although I will say, if they do have to turn it over to Joe Flacco is going to be hounding JT with targets in a way that the offense wouldn't be under Richardson. So, having a good backup quarterback though for these guys, checking in on these rushing quarterbacks, right, that end up with better backup quarterbacks is an important thing to check in on, right? Because if your guy is going to tank in value if something happens to your quarterback, a la Zach Wilson last year, I'm sorry, Zach Wilson and Garrett Wilson, that situation last year, that's a very uncomfortable situation. And obviously, like the Browns, right? They went and signed Flacco and changed that part of the equation. But checking in on it at the beginning of the year is something that's worth doing. And they have Flacco and the backup, for example, for the Jets now is Tyrod Taylor, much more competent backup and veteran quarterback. So if you're worried about it at all, or if you're worried about injuries to these major players, go and check in. It's not something you use to change where you rank somebody, just something to give you additional confidence when you're investing early in the draft.
yeah, couldn't agree more.
All right, and with that, we have our breakdown of the tier 3 running backs. And again, I have it Gibbs, Saquon, JT, and Matt has it JT, Saquon, Gibbs. So that gives them all a consensus rank of 5, which doesn't really help the listeners very much. But maybe we get somebody else on to discuss a couple of these guys, and we get a more definitive answer in terms of who you should be taking between these 3.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good one.